The ballroom was glowing with crystal chandeliers and the soft hum of violins. Billionaire Richard Callahan stood at the center, shaking hands with investors, flashing the smile that had made him both admired and envied across the city. Tonight's gala wasn't just about business, it was about legacy. But while champagne glasses clinked and laughter filled the room, one young girl noticed something nobody else did. Her eyes, wide and fearful, darted to the balcony above. A shadow moved where no one should have been. Her heart raced. She had been brought to the gala only because her father worked security at the venue. She didn't belong among the glittering gowns and polished shoes, but now none of that mattered. She saw the danger first. "Dad," she screamed, her voice piercing through the chatter and music. "They're going to kill you." The room froze. Richard turned, startled, his glass halfway to his lips. At that very second, a glint of metal caught the chandelier's light from the balcony above. Richard's hand trembled as the words echoed in his ears. The entire ballroom turned toward the girl, confusion rippling through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, others whispered that she was being dramatic. But Richard saw her face, her terror wasn't a child's imagination. He tilted his head up toward the balcony. Just for a second, he caught the shimmer of a rifle scope aimed directly at his chest. The billionaire's instincts kicked in. He dropped to the floor, sending his champagne glass shattering across the marble. Guests gasped and screamed, their glamorous night turning into chaos within seconds. The girl's father, a security guard, shoved through the panicked crowd toward his daughter. But before he could reach her, a deafening crack split the air, the rifle had fired. The bullet smashed into the pillar behind where Richard had been standing. People ducked, covering their heads. Security scrambled, radios flaring to life. But the shooter wasn't done. The shadow on the balcony shifted again, steadying the weapon for another shot. And Richard knew, he was still the target. Richard's pulse thundered in his ears as he crawled behind a marble column, shards of glass crunching under his palms. The glamorous gala had transformed into a war zone. Screams, overturned chairs, and the frantic shuffle of designer shoes echoed across the hall. The girl, still standing near the stage, pointed upward with trembling hands. "There." On the balcony, she cried, her voice cutting through the chaos. Security guards rushed toward the staircase leading up, but the shooter was quick. Another shot rang out, splintering the wooden railing just inches from one guard's head. Guests ducked lower, covering their faces, desperate to escape. Richard peeked out from behind the column, his breath shallow. His empire had survived financial crashes, lawsuits, and hostile takeovers, but never had his life itself been on the line. And now, in a twisted irony, it was a child's warning that had kept him alive. Through the smoke of panic, he caught the girl's eyes again. They were wide, filled not just with fear, but with certainty. She had seen something long before anyone else. The shooter adjusted their aim once more. This time, Richard knew he had only seconds to act. The gunman steadied their weapon, the long barrel glinting under the chandelier's glow. Richard felt the weight of those seconds press down on him like a vice. He couldn't just wait for another shot. He darted from behind the column, sprinting low toward the stage. The crowd scattered around him, some dropping to the floor, others rushing for the exits. A second gunshot thundered through the hall, the bullet grazing past Richard's shoulder and shattering a wine bottle on a nearby table. "Down here," the girl's father shouted, waving Richard toward a side corridor that led behind the stage. Richard dove in that direction, his lungs burning as he stumbled into the narrow passage. The girl had already slipped inside, clutching her father's arm. But just as the heavy door slammed shut behind them, Richard noticed something. Taped beneath the stairwell railing in the corridor was a small, black device blinking red. A bomb. His chest tightened. This wasn't just a lone sniper. Whoever was behind this had planned the billionaire's death in multiple ways. And Richard suddenly realized, someone very powerful wanted him gone. Richard froze, his eyes locked on the blinking red light. The girl's father yanked her behind him, instinctively shielding her. "Move," the guard barked, dragging Richard down the corridor. "If that goes off, this whole wing comes down." They burst through another door, finding themselves in a service hallway far from the glittering ballroom. The muffled chaos of the gala echoed behind them, but the danger was far from over. Richard leaned against the wall, sweat pouring down his forehead, his mind racing. Why me?" he gasped. Who would go this far? The guard checked the exits, then glanced back. "You've made plenty of enemies, Callahan. Maybe one of them finally decided to cash in." But before Richard could answer, the girl tugged at her father's sleeve. "Dad! I saw him. The shooter. I know who it was." Both men turned sharply toward her. Richard crouched down, his eyes burning into hers. "You saw their face?" She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Not just their face. I saw their ring. It had the Callahan family crest." Richard's blood ran cold. That wasn't just a stranger. That meant betrayal, someone close. Richard's breath caught in his throat. The Callahan family crest wasn't just a symbol, it was sacred, passed down only to those bound by blood or marriage. If the girl was right, the attempt on his life wasn't from an outsider. It was family. "Are you certain?" Richard pressed, his voice low but urgent. The girl nodded, her eyes unblinking. "I remember it. A gold ring, with the lion and crown. It flashed when he loaded the rifle." Richard staggered back, his heart pounding harder than the gunshots still echoing in his memory. His family was small, his brother, his estranged nephew, and his second wife. Only they carried rings like that. The guard pulled out his radio, barking orders for backup. "We need the sniper caught alive. He's tied to Callahan's circle." But Richard was hardly listening. His mind spun through years of dinners, deals, and buried grudges. He knew greed and resentment had poisoned parts of his family, but to hire assassins? To plant a bomb? He clenched his fists. If the girl's warning hadn't come when it did, he would already be dead. And now, there was no doubt, this was personal. Richard's jaw tightened as security led him through a back exit of the venue. The city air outside felt cold, sharp, as if the night itself had turned against him. Police sirens wailed in the distance, rushing toward the gala that had turned into a battlefield. But Richard couldn't shake the girl's words, the Callahan crest. His mind cycled through the possibilities like a cruel lottery wheel. His brother, jealous of Richard's fortune after years of being overshadowed. His nephew, reckless, drowning in debt, desperate for a way out. His wife, beautiful, ambitious, and lately, distant. Any of them could have reason to want him gone. The girl clung to her father, glancing up at Richard with hesitant eyes. "They won't stop, will they?" she whispered. Richard crouched down to her level, his voice steady but his stomach twisting. "Not until I find out who's behind this. And when I do, they'll regret ever trying." Before the guard could respond, a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. Two men in dark suits stepped out, flashing badges. "Mr. Callahan," one said firmly, "you need to come with us. Now. For your protection." But as Richard studied the insignia on their jackets, his blood chilled. These weren't his security men. And worse, one of them wore a gold ring with a lion and crown. Richard's eyes locked on the ring, and every muscle in his body tensed. The lion and crown gleamed under the streetlight, a family heirloom twisted into a symbol of betrayal. The man with the ring stepped closer. "Mr. Callahan, there's no time. We need to move you before the press swarms this place." His tone was calm, almost rehearsed. Richard forced a nod, masking the alarm surging through him. Years in business had taught him one thing: never reveal what you know until the moment it counts. "Of course," Richard said, stepping forward. "Lead the way." The girl tugged at her father's arm, whispering, "That's him, the one I saw." The guard's hand drifted toward the concealed holster under his jacket. He caught Richard's eye, reading the silent warning there. They both knew. As the suited men opened the SUV door, Richard made his move. With sudden force, he shoved the nearest man into the vehicle, slamming the door on him. The guard drew his weapon in the same breath, firing a warning shot into the air. The second man lunged, but Richard swung a broken champagne bottle he'd grabbed from the alley floor, catching the attacker across the face. The man stumbled back, cursing, blood streaming down his cheek. "Run!" the guard roared, grabbing his daughter's hand. Richard didn't hesitate. They sprinted into the darkened streets, tires screeching behind them as the SUV gave chase. This was no longer about survival. It was war within his own bloodline. The night swallowed them as they tore through the side streets, Richard's lungs burning with every step. Behind them, the black SUV roared like a predator on the hunt, headlights sweeping across brick walls and trash bins as it closed in. The girl's father shoved them into a narrow alley, his gun raised. "Keep moving. I'll slow them down." "No." Richard snapped, grabbing his arm. "If they want me, they'll kill you both to get to me. We stay together." The SUV screeched to a halt at the alley's entrance. The door swung open, and the man with the family crest ring stepped out, flanked by two more figures. Even in the shadows, Richard recognized the confident stride, the squared shoulders. It was his nephew, Adrien. Adrien's smirk glowed in the beam of the SUV's lights. "Uncle Richard," he drawled, his voice cold and mocking. "You were supposed to die tonight. Do you have any idea how much simpler life would be if you just disappeared?" Richard's stomach nodded. Adrien, the boy he once mentored, the heir he thought could inherit the empire, was the traitor. "You're a coward," Richard spat, his voice shaking with rage. "Instead of building your own legacy, you'd rather bury mine." Adrien raised his hand, signaling his men forward. "I don't need speeches. I just need you gone." The gunmen advanced, their weapons catching the light. The alley had become a cage, and Richard knew there was no backing out now. The gunmen stepped forward, the metallic click of their weapons echoing in the narrow alley. Richard stood frozen for a heartbeat, his mind racing. Outnumbered. Outgunned. But not outsmarted. He lifted his voice, calm and sharp, the same tone he used in boardrooms to dismantle rivals. "Think carefully, gentlemen. Adrien's promising you money, isn't he? Protection? A future?" The men hesitated, exchanging wary glances. Adrien's jaw tightened. "Don't listen to him. He's desperate." Richard took a step forward, his voice gaining strength. "He can't pay you what I can. You know my name, you know my reach. If I live, I can make you rich. If I die, Adrien's word is worth nothing. He's drowning in debt, and you'll drown with him." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. One of the gunmen lowered his weapon slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Don't you dare." Adrien snarled, grabbing the man's shoulder. But in that moment of distraction, the girl's father struck, charging forward and tackling the nearest thug to the ground. The alley erupted into chaos. Shots fired, fists flew, and Richard ducked behind a dumpster as bullets sparked against brick. Adrien cursed, retreating toward the SUV. "Kill them all. I don't care how messy it gets." Richard's blood boiled. This wasn't just survival anymore. His nephew had declared war on him, and the battlefield was no longer financial. It was life or death. Gunfire cracked through the alley, echoing like thunder between the walls. The guard wrestled one of Adrien's men to the ground, knocking the pistol from his grip and driving a fist into his jaw. Richard grabbed a loose metal pipe, swinging it hard to block another attacker's strike. The clash was brutal, desperate, and far from the polished world of wealth Richard was used to. The girl crouched behind a crate, her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with terror. Richard's gaze flicked toward her, he couldn't let Adrien's madness touch her. Fall back. Adrien barked, panic bleeding into his voice as he saw his plan crumbling. The man Richard had swayed earlier outright dropped his weapon and bolted down the alley. Another staggered from a blow to the ribs delivered by the guard. Realizing he was losing control, Adrien sprinted toward the SUV, yanking the door open. "You'll regret crossing me, uncle," he shouted, fury twisting his face. Richard lunged forward, pipe raised, but it was too late, the engine roared to life. Tires screeched as the SUV tore away, disappearing into the night. The alley fell silent except for the ragged sound of Richard's breathing. They had survived, but Adrien had escaped. Richard's chest heaved, his knuckles white around the pipe. He turned toward the girl, who was trembling but alive. She had saved him, and now he owed her everything. But he also knew one thing for certain, Adrien would return. And next time, he wouldn't settle for failure. Richard stood in the dim alley, his shirt torn, his pulse still hammering from the fight. The girl clung to her father, her small voice breaking through the silence. "He'll come back, won't he?" Richard looked at her, then at the empty street where Adrien's SUV had vanished. His jaw tightened. "Yes. And when he does, I'll be ready." The guard holstered his weapon, shaking his head. "Callahan, you can't just wait around. He's got resources, connections. He'll try again, sooner than you think." Richard straightened, his mind sharpening the way it always did before a deal. But this wasn't business anymore, this was blood. "Then we set the board before he does. Adrien thinks he's clever, but he forgets where he learned the game." The billionaire pulled out his phone, dialing a number few people knew. Within moments, a voice answered, a trusted ally from Richard's private security network. "I want every asset mobilized," Richard commanded. "Adrien Callahan is attempting to take me out. He's not just after me, he's after the Empire. We end this before he gets another chance." The girl's father glanced at him, uncertain. "You're not calling the police?" Richard's eyes were cold as steel. "No. Family matters stay in the family. Adrien wants war. Then war is what he'll get." The girl shivered, pressing closer to her father. She didn't fully understand the weight of Richard's words. But she knew one thing, tonight wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. 3 nights later, Richard's skyscraper glittered against the city skyline, but inside its top-floor office, the stage was set. Security systems were disabled in one wing, deliberately left vulnerable. A perfect trap. Richard sat behind his desk, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. The girl and her father had been moved to a safe location. Tonight, this was his fight alone. Midnight came. As expected, the elevator chimed softly. Adrien stepped out, dressed in black, a pistol in his hand and that same golden crest ring flashing under the light. His smirk carried the arrogance of someone who thought the game was already won. "You should have died at the gala," Adrien sneered. "But at least now, I'll inherit everything without the headlines of a massacre." Richard leaned back in his chair, calm, almost amused. "You always were impatient, Adrien. But you forgot one thing." Adrien frowned. "And what's that?" The office lights snapped on, flooding the room. Dozens of Richard's private security operatives stepped out from the shadows, weapons trained on his nephew. The trap had sprung. Adrien froze, his bravado crumbling. You set me up." Richard stood, his voice cutting like a blade. "No, Adrien. You set yourself up. The moment you chose betrayal, your fate was sealed." The guards closed in, wrenching the gun from Adrien's hand. His shouts of rage echoed through the office, but Richard didn't flinch. He looked down at his nephew one last time, his expression unreadable. "You wanted my empire," Richard said quietly. Now you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars, watching it thrive without you. As Adrien was dragged away, Richard finally exhaled, the weight of betrayal lifting from his shoulders. He owed his life to the girl who had shouted in time, and he vowed to protect her family for as long as he lived. The city outside glittered as though nothing had happened, but Richard Callahan knew the truth. His empire had been tested, his bloodline poisoned. And thanks to a single child's warning, he was alive to fight another day. The end.